Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today, we'll be discussing the Nika Devil Fruit. Specifically, we'll be exploring what a fully mastered and unrestricted Nika Devil Fruit could look like. Now, as many of you probably already know, the Nika fruit was referred to as the Gomu Gomu no Mi, or the rubber devil fruit for most of the series. And it was classified as a paramecia type devil fruit that grants the user's body the properties of rubber, effectively making them a rubber human. However, it was later revealed that this devil fruit is actually a mythical zoan type fruit called the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika, which allows the user to transform into the legendary sun god Nika, who happens to possess rubber-like properties along with some other very interesting powers. Now, making this video in particular is a little interesting because, excluding the pawpaw and modification devil fruits, one of the major reasons I started this unrestricted devil fruit series was due to the discourse around Gear 5 Luffy vs Kaido, specifically the way in which Luffy defeated Kaido using Bajrang Gun, which is essentially just a bigger version of King Kong Gun, which in turn is just a bigger and more springy version of Elephant Gun. So personally, I found this a bit disappointing, because even though I think Bajrang Gun is super cool and definitely should have been introduced in their fight, still, for the conclusion of a battle that I've been waiting over 1000 chapters for, marking Luffy's coronation to Emperor status, to essentially just be a larger version of what I saw in Dressrosa nearly 300 chapters ago, just bigger and with more haki, of course, that would be disappointing, especially given all the creativity shown with even the simplest devil fruits throughout the series. And remember, this disappointment comes in the context of the manga itself hyping up Gear 5 as the most ridiculous power in the world, stating that the user's imagination is the only limit to its potential. To be honest, a really big and strong punch isn't all that ridiculous or imaginative to me, especially considering that Luffy already did something similar back in Dressrosa. In fact, a younger Oda seemed to share this sentiment. In an interview for One Piece Great Newspaper Volume 2, Oda himself mentioned that he knew his audience would not be satisfied if the reason for defeating Kaido is just because Luffy's punch is so strong, and that he would have to find a solution somehow. I guess making the punch even bigger was the solution. Anyway, that's why I was disappointed with the conclusion of that fight. However, my reason for creating this unrestricted series isn't just because of my personal disappointment with Oda's storytelling choices, because even though I had hoped for a more creative ending to the Kaido battle, I understood that the final saga was still to come, which would give Luffy plenty of opportunities to showcase just how truly ridiculous and imaginative Gear 5 can be. So, the actual reason I decided to do this series was because of the discourse surrounding the battle. It wasn't just that some people didn't share my subjective disappointment in the fight's conclusion. Rather, it was seeing people claim that the fight could not possibly have ended any other way. Yup, despite Oda essentially opening the floodgates to limitless creativity with the Nika transformation, I saw people argue that because all Luffy really did before Gear 5 were big and strong punches, it was unreasonable to expect anything more than that, even now when his power is said to be the most ridiculous power in the world and is limited only by his imagination. This made me realize that a lot of One Piece fans, many of whom may have only watched or read a few popular anime or manga, simply don't have the frame of reference to properly evaluate just how ridiculous powers can actually get, especially when it comes to devil fruits, which I consider to be one of the best power systems in fiction. Thus, that's one of the main reasons I started this unrestricted devil fruit series. Now, here we are at the devil fruit that started it all, so let's get into it. So, one of the most interesting aspects of the sun god Nika imagery is the fact that he is always depicted with at least a sword or a spear. Now, as you should know by now, static construct creation is a fundamental ability of any devil fruit that produces a substance, as the user can create any static construct they desire from that substance. However, considering how this concept applies to the Nika fruit is a bit more intriguing, given that this devil fruit does not produce a tangible substance. Now, the most obvious answer, which many of you have probably already thought of, is Luffy's creation of the bat on Egghead. So while he did not create the bat from nothing, that is, he fashioned it from a tree, he did, however, appear to create the paint and paintbrush out of thin air. So whether he is simply fashioning constructs from his surroundings or pulling them from some theoretical hammer space, both possibilities are viable methods for the creation of static constructs. Additionally, although not often discussed, Luffy could also create static constructs using his own body, similar to how his elastic counterparts, such as Reed Richards and Plastic Man, manipulate their forms. However, while these possibilities are cool, they still feel somewhat limited to me, and, more importantly, they do not necessarily solve the challenge of creating animated constructs. And given that we have already seen several devil fruits capable of such feats, even at their base level, the ability to create animated constructs should be an expected feature of what is hyped up as the most ridiculous power in the world. Now, interestingly, the solution to this dilemma has been staring us in the face all along. That is, Luffy's very name, Monkey D. Luffy, and the attack name, Bajrang Gun, both of which hint at inspiration from famous mythical monkey figures, namely Hanuman and Sun Wukong. So the fact that we always see Nika wielding a sword or spear is particularly interesting because one of Sun Wukong's primary weapons is a staff. But beyond just a review of mythology, there's an important reason I bring up this comparison. You see, in Egghead, we see Luffy pluck some of his hair and turn it into a pair of goggles. High-tech goggles at that, as shown in the anime. So if you've made the connection, you'll realize that another well-known mythical figure who creates constructs by plucking his hair is Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong has over 84,000 strands of hair on his body, and with each one, he can create static constructs, just as Luffy did. More importantly, however, he can also create animated constructs, most commonly clones of himself, that are equal in strength to his original body. And even outside of the creation of fully autonomous clones, we have seen other elasticity users replicate body parts. This is a concept that Luffy has flirted with even before Gear 5, as demonstrated by his attack Kong Organ, which creates the illusion of multiple arms due to the speed of his movement. So, I hope you can see that not only at an unrestricted level, but even based on the fundamental facts we already know about Luffy and Devil Fruits as a whole, the creation of animated constructs, such as duplicating himself, should almost be expected from him. And the foundation for this ability is already clearly in place. Now, the next major fundamental aspect of the Nika fruit is its ability to rubberize anything. In Skypiea, we saw Luffy interact with lightning by kicking it away. However, he wasn't actually rubberizing the lightning, it was simply the elemental weakness mechanic at play. That is, the fact that rubber can interact with lightning as if it were a solid. However, in Wano, we saw Luffy actually rubberize lightning, a fact explicitly stated in the Road to Laugh Tale chapters. He unambiguously rubberized lightning, meaning he basically turned lightning into a solid, allowing him to grab and throw it. Now, most people don't fully grasp how crazy this ability is, and that's because lightning itself is a pretty confusing topic. So, as explained in my How Fast Are One Piece Characters video, now lightning is a little complex, but in essence it consists of two phases, an invisible leader phase and a visible discharge phase. This invisible leader phase describes the time before the lightning strikes, when the pathway that lightning will eventually take is basically established via atmospheric changes. And then we have the discharge phase, also called the return stroke, and this describes the actual discharge of electric current along this pathway. So this discharge phase or return stroke is what you would actually see as lightning, and it is the point that you can actually get shocked. However, let's put aside the mechanics of lightning for a moment and ask, what exactly is lightning? Like, what is that thing called lightning that Luffy has rubberized and is holding? Now, based on the science behind lightning, Luffy would essentially be holding the lightning flash, which is the return stroke of a lightning bolt. And this part of lightning is commonly referred to as plasma. Now, plasma is another complex topic, but to put it simply, plasma is often called the fourth state of matter. You can think of it like this. Heating up a solid makes the atoms more free-moving, turning it into a liquid. Then, heating up a liquid makes the atoms even more free-moving, and thus further turns it into a gas. And if you continue this, heating a gas to temperatures typically above 5,000 degrees, it enters a superheated state called plasma, where even atoms break apart, causing their electrons to separate from the rest of the atom, this is plasma, the fourth state of matter, and the return stroke of lightning is essentially plasma through which pure electrical energy is moving. And electrical energy, by the way, is just the movement of electrons. Now, I may not have explained this perfectly as I'm not a physicist, but to put this in simple terms, Luffy was essentially able to rubberize pure energy, and if he can rubberize something as fundamental as energy itself, then the Nika fruit, even at its base level awakening, should logically be able to rubberize almost anything else. The real challenge is simply thinking about what to rubberize, thus why we say limited only by imagination. Now, one of my favorite possibilities to consider is the rubberization of space, and a great way to conceptualize how this could work is by looking at Takako Uro from Jujutsu Kaisen, whose power allows her to manipulate space like a fabric. So, she can do things like wear space as clothing, redirect attacks by twisting the space around her, and attack opponents similar to the Quake fruit by striking space itself, transmitting force to her enemies. And remember, this idea isn't even far-fetched for One Piece, given that, even if we ignore the fact that Luffy rubberized energy, we already have devil fruits like the Quake fruit, which allows the user to grab and manipulate space. And even if we set aside that example as well, we still know that Gear 5 Luffy can more or less ignore the conventional laws of physics, such as when we've seen him run on air, leaving fire trails behind him, and even stand upside down on clouds, because screw gravity, I guess, before pulling lightning from the clouds. I can imagine even more fun possibilities like rubberizing and stretching time itself, to get an effect similar to the principle of time dilation, where Luffy and his opponent would experience time differently. Or even the application of this to consciousness itself, like with Mr. Fantastic, who stretched his consciousness like rubber to expand it, allowing him to see new possibilities and even grow new brain structures. So ultimately, the ability to rubberize anything extends far beyond Luffy, simply stretching and flattening his opponents. It opens up limitless possibilities. Now, if you've been watching my Unrestricted Devil Fruit series, I'm sure you understand by now that where a devil fruit truly gets crazy is in its conceptual level applications. For example, by taking the concept of freezing to the extreme, we've seen ice users freeze even time itself. But even if you haven't watched a single video in my Unrestricted Devil Fruit series, you would still already have an idea of this concept from Kuma's Paw Paw fruit. That is, by utilizing the concept of deflection, he can deflect anything, even intangible concepts like pain and memories. And if we even take a step back and look at seemingly weaker devil fruits, such as Kujaku's Whip fruit, which makes her a training human, we see similar craziness. Like, by applying the concept of training, she can train inanimate objects like buildings, causing them to move. While it may not be the flashiest or strongest power, when you actually think about it, it is absolutely ridiculous. So, in a world full of powers that, even at their base, are inherently and overtly insane, what makes the Nika fruit stand out as the most ridiculous of them all? To answer this, we first need to understand that what we're comparing isn't actually the devil fruits themselves, but rather the concepts they represent. I briefly explained this in my Chop Chop Fruit video, where I said, but then there are devil fruits that allow the control over certain actions. The archetypical example of this is the Nikyu no Mi, which is what I think to be the most powerful devil fruit because it grants the user the control over the action of deflection or repulsion, or put more simply, the action of pushing. Similarly, the Ope Ope no Mi is another contender for one of the most powerful devil fruits in the series, and it grants the user the control over the action of operating, or put more simply, the action of modification. So by now you should realize where I'm going with this. That's right. Though it may seem simple at first, the Bar no Mi is actually one of those devil fruits that grants its user the control over an action. That is, it grants its user the control over the action of splitting or separation. Thus, to properly assess the Nika fruit, we must first ask, what is the underlying concept it represents? Some may think the obvious answer is that it represents the sun god Nika, but that's not really an answer, because even gods represent certain concepts. For example, if I mention Hades from Greek mythology, you'd think of death and the afterlife. Similarly, if I mention Thor or Zeus, you might think of lightning or electric energy. And if I mention Aphrodite, you'd think of beauty and desire. So, what concept does the sun god Nika represent? Well, it's actually the same concept that rubber represents. That is, a kind of malleability, or, better phrased, freedom. That's right, freedom. The power to fight in any way he wants. The power that is only restricted by imagination. The god who was considered a liberator by the ancients, whose awakening is associated with the drums of liberation, and whose fruit has found its way into the hands of Luffy, whose core value is freedom. Freedom is the concept of the Nika fruit, and that is what makes it the most ridiculous power in the world. This is because every other devil fruit, even at their most powerful, is still technically confined to a single concept. Whereas, the whole point of freedom is to bend and stretch even these types of rules. To put it simply, at an unrestricted level, freedom quite literally means a lack of restrictions. This is why, even at its base awakening, the Nika fruit allows the user to ignore normal physics, such as standing upside down on clouds and running on air, as well as bypassing normal biological restrictions by having detachable body parts, including scars. This is the beauty of the Nika fruit. This is why it is truly the most ridiculous fruit in the One Piece world. It grants the user absolute freedom, but that's only half the story, because Nika also represents another concept. Like, you'll notice that in his depictions, he brings joy to people's faces, not just by liberating them, but because his very being exudes joy and laughter. So, when you combine these two concepts of absolute freedom and the joyful use of that freedom, what power best fits this description at an unrestricted level? You guessed it, Toon Force. And by now, it should be pretty clear to you that Luffy's Gear 5 transformation, and even Luffy's character as a whole, has been heavily influenced by popular Toon characters. And I mean, Oda even literally said he gave Luffy his specific power set so he could fool around and write the type of manga he wants to write. And at an unrestricted level, Toon Force characters have done some truly wild things, like casually destroying planets and throwing suns and black holes, as seen in the battle between Marvin the Martian and Yosemite Sam, or unraveling the fabric of the universe, as seen with SpongeBob SquarePants. Some characters, like Bugs Bunny, have even broken the fourth wall and become the authors of their own stories. Now, the point of this video isn't to argue whether Toon Force is the perfect description for Luffy's power, nor to say that Luffy needs to reach these absurd levels of strength. Rather, it's to provide a general framework for understanding the Nika fruit's potential and to inspire your imagination and excitement for endgame Luffy. And of course, even if in the final saga Luffy doesn't go above and beyond to demonstrate just how truly ridiculous his powers can be, I hope this at least helps most of you understand that post-awakening, Luffy can do more than just punch really hard. His imagination truly is his only limit. But anyway, I could say much more about an unrestricted Nika fruit, such as the ability to modify the body in ways similar to Logia's, as seen when Reed Richards split his head in two, or even more complex body alterations, like moving the eyes to the fingers and enlarging the olfactory bulb in the nose to increase one's sense of smell, or the ability to use stretching more tactically, like Plastic Man's utilization of stretching to change his appearance, or even if things were allowed to get more graphic, rather than just stretching someone from the inside, allowing Luffy to actually pop their bodies, as seen done by the likes of Plastic Man. But I won't get into all of that, because by now, you should have a pretty good idea of what an unrestricted Nika fruit would look like. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. But anyway, see you guys next time.